hearing all the conversations and all this great community building. Um, Being part of a community is important for that spiritual journey. So I'm glad that you're able to participate in that. And if you think about it, we all would like to have more good people in our lives. And if you look around, these are people who are willing to take time from their schedule for self-growth, for self-knowledge, and to try to make at least themselves better, if not the world better. So great place to bring in some good people into your lives. So thank you for being here today. Welcome to the Fukwang Buddhist Temple of San Antonio. I want to thank the Master Tai Fukwang, who is the abbot of the temple, who allows us to meet here. I also want to thank Master Thich Quang Tri, who is the other monk of this temple, who supports us and helps us also as we continue to develop this program. I am, and this is Leon Bryan, my co-conspirator in this, partner in crime. Today we have our parable day, or what we're going to do a little different today. We're going to actually have a reading from a very famous Buddhist author named Thich Nhat Hanh. He is almost at the level of, I guess, the Dalai Lama in terms of fame. In terms of impact on Buddhism in Western psychology, Thich Nhat Hanh is also up there with the Dalai Lama. He was most famous for his work where he first became infamous, actually, for his Buddhist work in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. He and his followers were abused quite a bit during that war because they refused to take a side. And so they got beatings from both sides of that war. And eventually, he made his way to the United States and started some really wonderful, lively centers called Plum Villages. So the Plum Village, there's one in Paris, there's one in, I think it's Missouri or Mississippi. So what starts with in one of the states that starts with an M? Do you know? Huh? Minnesota? Oh, maybe. No, I don't think it's Minnesota. I think it's either Mississippi or Missouri, but
there's one that's meeting right now in San Antonio, downtown.
oh wow.
No,
The Plum Village.
Plum Branch Village.
Plum Branch Village. That is nice. I'll have to look that up. So just look up Plum Branch Village, San Antonio on the internet and you should be able to find it.
Yeah.
I'm checking that out. So today we're going to be listening to a reading from this author, Thich Nhat Hanh, on the topic of suffering. We're going to be moving into, so 2 weeks ago we started to introduce the topic of the Four Noble Truths, which are the fundamental, most basic teachings of Buddhism. And then starting in 2 weeks, I'll be giving a Dharma talk on the first Noble Truth, which is the first part of the four-part Noble Truth. And it talks about suffering. Suffering is actually kind of the wrong word for it. And so I'll explain and talk more about that in 2 weeks. But today's story will help us introduce that topic. For the service today then, what we'll do is we're going to do a short guided meditation. This guided meditation is something that you can easily do on your own. It's in times of stress, it can be a really good de-stressor. Then after the guided meditation, Leon will read the excerpt from Thich Nhat Hanh. Then we'll do a short meditation, silent meditation. And usually I ask you to focus on the breath, but this time what I want you to do is focus on the story and what it pulls from you, what it does for you, what thoughts, what feelings, how does it sit with you? And so again, just sit with the story, with the excerpt, with the teachings from Thich Nhat Hanh, and just observe. There's no need to do a dissertation in 10 minutes. It's just enjoy and sit with the story, with the lesson. After the short meditation, we'll discuss it here. Generally, I like to try to have you all do most of the talking, and so I'll just open it up, and whoever wants to share any thoughts, insights, feelings, or comments, feel free to do so at that time. And if you have questions, that's a really good time also. We'll discuss them together as a group. Okay, great. So get in a position that feels comfortable. Not so comfortable that you'll fall asleep, but comfortable enough that you can stay in that position for a while. And this guided meditation is pretty simple. I'll ask you to take 3 deep breaths, each one slower than the last. Then I'll ask you to focus on the sounds around you, whether it be the AC unit, people moving around you, someone else is breathing, any sounds around you. Then I'll ask you to focus internally on the sensations within you. And during this time, you may pay attention to your heartbeat, your breathing. All right? Then I'll ask you to go back again to focusing on the sensations around you. And then 3 deep breaths, and we're done with the guided meditation. So let us begin. Take 3 deep breaths. Each breath longer, deeper than the last. Now take a moment to focus on the sounds and the sensations around you. Really focus on the here and now. Now turn inwards. Pay attention to the sensations within your breath, your heart. Now refocus on the sensations around you. Now take 3 deep breaths, and when you're ready, open your eyes.
We're a little hamstrung here because our wireless units are in shop, so we'll manage. Even though Alex explained the change in plans, I do owe you a little bit of an apology because I know that we usually on the second Tuesday we usually do the story or the parable, and what happened was as I was researching a good parable to kind of set up the first noble truth about suffering, I read a lot about suffering. And so as I was reading, I came across an excerpt from a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, who Alex has already told you a little bit about. Vietnamese monk born in Vietnam who eventually migrated to France and now has centers all over the world. He just died earlier this year at the age of 95. So a long life of service for really a wonderful, very kind and gentle monk. And so I think that's what endears him to so many people. So what I'd like to do is read this. This is from a book. This excerpt is called Entering the Heart of the Buddha. And it's from his book entitled The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, Transforming Suffering into Peace, Joy, and Liberation. Buddha was not a god. He was a human being like you and me, and he suffered just as we do. If we go to the Buddha with our hearts open, he will look at us, his eyes filled with compassion, and say, because there is suffering in your heart, it is possible for you to enter my heart. The layman Vimala Kirti said, because the world is sick, I am sick. Because people suffer, I have to suffer. This statement was also made by the Buddha. Please don't think that because you are unhappy, because there is pain in your heart, that you cannot go to the Buddha. It is exactly because there is pain in your heart that communication is possible. Your suffering and my suffering are the basic condition for us to enter the Buddha's heart and for the Buddha to enter our hearts. For 45 years, the Buddha said over and over again, I teach only suffering and the transformation of suffering. When we recognize and acknowledge our own suffering, the Buddha, which means the Buddha in us, will look at it, discover what has brought it about, and prescribe a course of action that can transform it into peace, joy, and liberation. Suffering is the means the Buddha used to liberate himself and is also the means by which we can become free. The ocean of suffering is immense, but if you turn around, you can see the land. The seed of suffering in you may be strong, but don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy. When one tree in the garden is sick, you have to care for it, but you don't overlook all the healthy trees. For even while you have pain in your heart, you can enjoy the many wonders of life. The beautiful sunset, the smile of a child, the many flowers and trees. To suffer is not enough. Please don't be imprisoned by your suffering. If you have experienced hunger, you know that having food is a miracle. If you have suffered from the cold, you know the preciousness of warmth. When you have suffered, you know how to appreciate the elements of paradise that are present. If you dwell only in your suffering, you will miss paradise. Don't ignore your suffering, but don't forget to enjoy the wonders of life for your sake and for the benefit of many beings. I grew up in a time of war. There was destruction all around. Children, adults, values, a whole country. As a young person, I suffered a lot. Once the door of awareness has been opened, you cannot close it. The wounds of war in me are still not all healed. There are nights I lie awake and embrace my people, my country, and the whole planet with my mindful breathing. Without suffering, you cannot grow. Without suffering, you cannot get the peace and joy you deserve. Please don't run away from your suffering. Embrace it and cherish it. Go to the Buddha, sit with him, and show him your pain. He will look at you with loving kindness, compassion, and mindfulness, and you will be able to heal the wounds in your heart and the wounds in the world. The Buddha called suffering a holy truth because our suffering has the capacity of showing us the path to liberation. Embrace your suffering and let it reveal to you the way to peace. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.
So because this is a little longer, what we did is we printed out the excerpt. And so during the meditation we're going to do now, pass these around, pass it to the back. Feel free during the meditation if you want to look at it, review things that were said. Or if you just want to sit with what you remember, you can do that as well. We should have exactly enough for everyone.
We make it.
Yeah, we made it.
Intuition.
All right, so I'm going to start, I'm going to ring the bell here for our short meditation, but feel free to reread it, feel free to do as you feel called to do. So you have before you a teaching on suffering. You've had time to sit with it, to think about it. So now I invite you all to share any insight, emotions, comments, or questions that may have arisen during your meditation.
I keep thinking about my work as a counselor and the whole time in this. And, in suffering, you can only take someone as far as you've been. And that thought just kept repeating itself throughout the meditation. And, just when you think about what you've been through, your life experiences, and working with others, that's what just kept resonating for me.
I remember a counselor once saying, I'm with you, I'll do 49%. The other 51 is up to you. I thought that was a good way to put it. Made me feel good that it was with me, but it's like, but you gotta do this.
Good, I like that.
I kept getting this phrase in my head repeated over and over of grasping towards pleasure and avoidance of pain. And I feel like that's where I've been the past couple of weeks. And that grasping, that pull towards those type of behaviors has been causing so much suffering for me. And I felt so out of alignment. And I just felt called to be here today. So thank you for the reading.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you
Sharon.
for being here, making the choice to come.
I think that's a very common human condition that you have there. Bouncing between desire and aversion.
Yeah. It is at the very root of suffering. This aversion and attachment is what Buddhism calls it. But that's in a month and 2 weeks down the line. You have to come back at the beginning of November for that one.
Okay.
But it is a very important insight. So thank you for sharing that.
It makes me think of like grief and loss. I think grief counseling, like a general principle, is like the more you run from it, the less it's really going to turn out good for you. Like, go to what is so painful, engage with the loss, whatever that means. That's abstract, but that's kind of what this is saying a little bit. Like it says, embrace your suffering. It's the same sort of thing with grief. Like, you really have to like lean into it in order to progress or get some sort of benefit, which is like really overwhelming to think about in some ways.
Yeah. I think a lot of times when I lean into something that's maybe newer, I'm noticing for the first time, shame will come up, or very sharp fear, and then I'll back up, and then the more that you like stay with it, it kind of opens like a little present, and then eventually you're like, oh, okay, I'm here with you, or you're not as scary as you initially were.
Very good. Step into the pain.
Sounds like a Nike commercial.
Right? Just do it.
Just do it.
Really good insights today. What else? Keep it coming. This is awesome.
I really like this sentence here on the fourth paragraph here. The seed of suffering you may be strong, but don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy.
Oh, yes.
Because that seems like you can't just wait for it to end and then now you can be happy. It's like you gotta do it regardless. You have to see what's good.
Was that part talking about like death? Cause like if you're living, you're suffering, right? So it's like don't wait till the suffering ends. Is that-
You could take it that way, or you could take it his way. I mean, that's kind of what, it's one of the things I like about Thich Nhat Hanh is that you read it again in 5-10 years, you'll see something different because you'll be a different person. And so both death
Right.
and right now. I think both could be correct.
I think that's why the term suffering is so confusing, especially in the West, because we have such an antagonistic relationship with suffering and pain, and I've got to be great or I'm terrible. These dualities, right? So it just seems that, like you say, we just learn to rest in it, just to let it be there. And sometimes, so I thought of this other good story. Someone goes out in the backyard and they need to get something out of the tool shed, and it's dark, and the tool shed, the light's not on. So they go in the tool shed, and they almost have a heart attack because there's a snake in the corner, and they're panicking, and sweat's coming down, and they flip on the light, and it's a coiled rope. It's a piece of rope. It's not a snake at all. So that little story speaks to me about how we, like you say, all these anxieties get stirred up, and all of a sudden then we're off just experiencing all these anxieties, and we're not at all relating to the causes of the suffering.
Part of stepping into the pain, if we use that phrasing, the embracing, the turning towards the suffering, the cravings, the longings, allows us to get to know them and understand them. So as long as we are running away from what's causing us some suffering, we never get to know them, and so whatever is causing that suffering doesn't get addressed. So it perpetuates the suffering. But when we're able to sort of turn around, embrace it, look at it, be curious about it, turn on the lights in the shed, then we get to know, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, or it's not as bad now as it was back then, or I'm experiencing this because of this. And so that's where the mindfulness you're practicing through meditation comes in, is you turn towards the suffering, you focus that mindfulness that you're developing here in meditation, and you focus that tool of mindfulness on what's causing you to suffer. Be curious about it, analyze it, learn about it. And the suffering begins to diminish. You may uncover other little bits of sufferings here and there that are related. It's not as simple as just one thing. It's often interconnected with a few other things. But that's part of the process of, at least I think, is part of the process of enlightenment, this unraveling of this web of suffering that we have within us. And if you pull on one thread, then it becomes easier to pull on the next, and the next. And the amount of suffering in your life begins to diminish. People in the back have been kind of quiet. Anything over there? Any insights, thoughts, comments, questions?
Be something that is processing.
Yeah.
I have a few kind of just different perspectives that were kind of coming together. One is like, coming from a Mexican background, hearing my grandmother and my mother talking about how much they suffer. And, it's like a competition almost. This right here, this one. Oh, yeah, well, both of these arms so there's like this, I want more suffering.
Yeah.
And then, the other perspective is undermining perhaps the suffering and seeing at least I'm not like so-and-so, she's really got problems or whatever. And even though you got a problem, it's like you're comparing those. And then I think just the, of course, the third part of that, the other extreme is denial that you're suffering. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, how to do that, you know? So kind of like trying to see those play themselves out in different ways in my own life at different times, you know, those influences and then how that's expressed, how I express it.
In many ways, that focusing on others is a way of running away also. Oh, my ankle's broken, but that's okay. That person lost their leg. Treat them first. But you're still in pain and suffering, but you're ignoring it because you're not worthy of treatment. But you can both get treatment. You could both get help. That person can get help. You can get help. And so, yeah, focusing too much on the other can, or I'm not suffering as bad as that other person, can be another way of running away from the suffering.
I've noticed that in my own thoughts, but they're sneaky. They're like, oh, this person's jealous of you. No. No. That's your thought, right? You know, this person's harming you. That is, physically, yes, okay, yes, but that's also like, they're really sneaky, you know? Because you can buy into them for a very long time until you see, like, no, this is a thought. So it has nothing to do with this other person.
Good.
That's interesting.
Here's something else to consider then, to add to the conversation. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Mind-boggling every time I hear it. I can't wrap my head around it.
I've said this, if some of you may have heard me say this before. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional.
It makes sense to me.
Do y'all remember?
Bad things happen to you, so it's painful, but if you just focus on feeling sorry for yourself, and that's optional. You don't have to feel sorry for yourself. I mean, it happens, so it's going to be painful, but what you do with that is up to you.
Yeah.
Do y'all remember the parable about the poisoned arrow? The guy was shot with the arrow on the battlefield, a poisoned arrow. And the surgeon came over and said, we've got to remove it immediately. He goes, not until I know who shot it at me, until I know what he looked like, until I know what kind of wood this arrow's made out of. You want to know everything about it, right? Meanwhile, he's not going to make it very long. So it reminded me of that parable. This one we read a couple months, 3 months ago. It's been a while.
I have a question about choice and your choice to suffer. Because it seems to me like you have a choice only when you realize you have a choice. And I'm wondering if there's a way to expedite that kind of realization, or if it's something that just has to happen naturally, where I'm not sure how much of a choice that is, actually. I'm not sure if it's something that your soul needs to go through in order to achieve that realization, or if it's something that you can consciously sit down with and give yourself the time to explore and reach that point.
Reach.
Consciously.
So reach what point and what choice?
The choice not to suffer.
Okay.
The choice to accept the pain and move through the suffering.
I think the point is that I agree with you. I have the same question. The point is you have to have those resources, emotional, cognitive resources to realize that you have a choice. Sometimes people are so overwhelmed or basically they are too down, or they don't have the emotional availability or knowledge. Growing up maybe in an abusive family, all they know sometimes is to deal in that way with anger and suffering, to respond to life happen, what happens in the life. So sometimes I don't think we always have a choice. Maybe we have to grow, evolve, learn from other people. We have the awareness that we, sometimes we don't have the awareness that we have the choice. And sometimes the pain is so significant that it's difficult to realize. Yeah, sometimes.
Well, maybe that's the choice in and of itself, whether you're going to seek the knowledge to understand, or you're just going to curl up in a ball and just let things happen to you.
But I think like the choice is there, whether you know it or not. Like you're saying, Jerry, you know, you may not realize that there's a choice, but just because you don't realize it doesn't mean that there isn't one.
I just, the issue with that is it's entirely operating on that we're like always rational and able to be rational and make choices and then behave rationally off that choice. Like, you know what I mean? Like normally when we're having pain, you can speak like the brain, like your brain has been hijacked. Like you are not thinking logically, truly. Like you are in fight or flight, like crocodile mode. So to think in those moments like rationally, and I have this choice, and this is my choice, and then I'm going to do this, like it just seems so overwhelming. I think that's what I was getting at, and it's hard to wrap my head because of their two questions and points.
Okay. I wonder if you could consider all pain equally. Maybe not. So somebody hits my leg with a hammer, that's a real kind of pain. And like you're saying, that because of my physical body's reaction, you're right, I might not have the presence of mind to be logical about it at that point. But if you think about all the times that suffering is very subtle, so we're expecting something and we don't get it. And now we're just having a crappy day and we walk out and then, you know, we interact with somebody else and now they're having a bad day. And it's just all generated by the mental mindset.
So I don't have the answer because I still suffer. So I don't have the answer. I have parts, and so I'll share the parts I have, and hopefully they can be useful. One, your choice question gets to kind of free will, which is always such a sticky topic. The way I approach free will is, I'm like a toy top that's spinning. And I am a victim of winds that blow me this way and winds that blow me this way. Tilts of the table that bring me down, tilts of the table that pick me up. And I'm constantly spinning around. And so I have things that I've learned, things I've inherited from my past karmic action or from other people's karmic action that I have no control over. But there are moments when the top is just perfectly balanced and I have the most influence. Not control, influence. I can tip one way or the other. And other times the force is so great that my influence is more of like, I'm going this way whether I like it or not, but maybe I can move a little bit over. So that's just how I'm dealing with that question at this point in my spiritual journey. So maybe that can be helpful for you. I don't think that I have complete control over my life. I have influence. And sometimes that influence has more of an impact. Those moments in our lives when we really hit maybe rock bottom, or where I make a choice that I know is going to impact the rest of my life. Those are those balanced points at the top when I can have the most influence on my life. Otherwise, I'm on this rapid river and all I can do is just try to push myself towards the middle or away from some rocks. But I'm still headed down the river. So I don't think it's always a matter of choice. I think sometimes we do inherit certain things that we're not aware of, which then leads me to the second piece. The conscious, knowledgeable thinking, I have a choice. Right? That's part of the practice. If you continue to practice, if you continue to meditate, to grow in mindfulness, to grow in self-awareness, it becomes less of a thinking and more of a doing. And it's not completely foreign to you. I am certain that you've had moments in your life where something painful was happening to you, but you chose to stay in the pain because you needed to help someone or someone else. You know, a box landed on my finger, but if I remove my hands from this box, it's going to fall on this child. So I'm going to suffer the pain on my finger, maybe risk losing my finger because it wasn't a rational thought. It just happened. And typically it happens because there were other conditions beforehand. Love of this child, or being raised in a way where you learn to you offer up yourself for loved ones or for others. And so those conditions that predisposed me to make that doing of just staying in the pain. While if I had had an upbringing that was more abusive or neglectful, then I may not have cared what the consequences were. I needed to get out of that pain right away. So the conditions beforehand lead up to how you do or what you do with pain. Hence the importance of a practice. Hence the importance of meditation and mindfulness. Hence the importance of trying to follow the Eightfold Path and develop your wisdom, your concentration, the right speech, a right moral lifestyle. Because it sets up the conditions that when you encounter the inevitable pain, you suffer less and maybe not at all. So remember, and I try to remind myself, which is why I said it first, we're not enlightened. And so how we think about pain and suffering should be circumspect. We should be suspicious of what we're thinking. Because obviously how we're thinking right now is not good enough. Because we're still suffering. So question how you're thinking. Question your beliefs. Questions your attitude. Continue the practice and slowly move towards, try to influence that top to try and maintain that balance and have more influence. Those are my pieces. And I try to remind myself every day to question my own beliefs and my own thoughts because I'm still suffering. So I don't have the answer. I have parts of it. And I hope that those parts, you can do something with them and then teach me so that I can suffer less too. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. That is actually based on a physiological reality. Pain is a signal that comes through the nerves, through the brainstem, into the pain center of your brain. Suffering occurs on the outer cortex of your brain, the thinking part of your brain. What you do with the pain, that's where the suffering occurs or does not occur. If you've led a lifestyle or if you've been a victim of abuse or things like that, those conditions will condition your brain to suffer more. Your conditions, our conditions, are making us suffer. That's why we're suffering. We're thinking about these pains in life as moments of suffering, moments of dukkha, and I'm going to explain what dukkha is in 2 weeks. And so those conditions make us suffer. What Buddha calls us to do is to be free of those conditions, to transcend those conditions, to become aware of them so that we can then enjoy the freedom from them, to get out of that cycle of suffering. So if you're suffering, you still got work to do. You're not there. And I can't call myself an enlightened Buddha because I still suffer. You have a question, comments, thoughts? What time is it? I got a few more minutes.
I guess I have a comment. Like, you don't have to embrace the suffering, like he said. It's like if something, like you said, suffering is optional. So you don't have to enumerate, you don't have to live with the suffering. If it's physical pain or something.
Yeah, we don't want to. We don't need to grasp and attach to the suffering. I must suffer.
Yeah, keep thinking about.
I have worth because I suffer. Right? That's kind of like the abuelita mentality, right? I have worth because I suffer, and so there's an attachment to the suffering. So that's the wrong type of embracing.
Exactly.
We don't want to attach. It's not a grasping and holding on to. No, I'm not letting you go.
Just do the root cause analysis and that's it.
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of where I go to.
Yeah.
Done with it.
What's causing this?
Yeah.
What's at the root of it?
And if we go back to the embrace word, think about a time you were suffering and someone just gave you a hug. That's the kind of embrace that I think, at least that's my take on the word embrace in this excerpt. Think of how, it doesn't take the suffering or the loss away, but it feels so good to be held. I'm not alone. That's the embrace, that's the definition of embrace that I took from this excerpt. When you can turn to your own suffering and embrace yourself and say, hey, you have a right to suffer. The conditions have been there. It sucks. And, when we get through this, let's work on it. Let's see what we can do so that we don't have to go through this again. I mean, think of how wonderful that self-compassion can be. We show it to others when we see them suffering. Why not show it to yourself?
I came from the Christian tradition, and of course there's a lot of talk about there of letting God into your heart, or being in the heart of God. But when Thich Nhat Hanh presents it, it's just really different, because he's saying that you can engage with the Buddha, and of course he means because the Buddha's here. You're not going to engage with someone who's been dead for 2,600 years. I mean, you're not going to be much help as a person. But anyhow, that helped me a lot, because in the beginning there was so much external, internal thing happening with me in terms of Buddhism. It's like, okay, Buddhism, wonderful world, and inside I'm this total mess. And of course I've learned that, no, this is all Buddhism, it's all okay, we're okay, we're here.
I want to echo something else that's there. The suffering itself is a tool, a learning tool. And so one of the things, and Leon again alluded to this, one of the bad things about calling dukkha suffering, or translating the word dukkha, which is the word that was used into suffering, is we think of it as something to get rid of. But dukkha, as the Buddha used it, is meant to be a teacher, a lesson, a flag saying, hey, there's something here to work on. There's something here to pay attention to. Don't run away from me. I'm trying to get your attention.
You'd only be running away from yourself, right? Because this is all happening internally.
I have something to add real quick.
Go for it.
Today I was just going through an incredible amount of emotional pain, and I realized that my thinking was causing the suffering. And when I realized that my thoughts were causing that, I was thinking, okay, well, what is it that I usually do in moments like this? I usually run away from my emotions. So I decided to turn the other way and go towards them and allow myself to feel them. And that felt so freeing for me. Usually, I will suffer in situations like this for like at least a week or something like that. And it didn't, I mean, it was just maybe an hour or two. I feel like suffering is an amazing gift, because like you were saying, it's kind of like a red flag, it's an opportunity, it's like trying to get my attention and say, hey, like there's something to look at.
Right.
Something is out of alignment, make another choice. So I made another choice today.
Beautiful.
That's awesome. Let's actually wrap up on time today. What do you think?
Good. Wrap up. We'll let everybody get out of here on time this week. Yes.
So Leon has for us one more quote.
One more little gem that I came across. This is also by Thich Nhat Hanh from another book. One of his. He's written like 250 books, so I'll recommend look into them. Okay, another time he wrote, "Suffering isn't some kind of external, objective source of oppression and pain. There might be things that cause you to suffer, such as loud music or bright lights, which may bring other people joy. There are things that bring you joy that annoy other people. The rainy day that ruins your plans for a picnic is a boon for the farmer whose field is parched." So it's all relative and it's all in your mind.
Good. I take it from the amount of stillness in the room today. It wasn't just silence, there was a stillness, a lot less fidgeting. I take that to mean that there was a lot of profound moments for you in listening to each other. I recommend continuing to nurture those seeds that have been implanted today. Take some time today maybe to journal. Take some time today to just sit quietly and think about what you learned and how it applies to your life. Take some time to really help this moment grow within you. Good. Announcements. Is Master Quan Tree's meditation this Saturday?
Yes.
I believe it is, right?
Yes.
So Master Thich Quan Tree is holding his Meditation 101 classes, and so if you want to learn more about meditation itself, it's a wonderful opportunity to learn from someone who's been practicing a long time and has been studying meditation a long time. So it's this Saturday at
10 a.m.
10 a.m.
It's on the second and fourth Saturdays.
And then on Sunday we have our usual service. So we have 12:30 right here in the front room. Will be our usual service if you want to come join us. It's usually about an hour. And we'll do, usually Master Thich Quan Tree or Master Fu Quang will give a Dharma talk, and then we'll have some chanting. And it's all about an hour of time. Any other announcements?
We're going to fix the link in the meetup thing, but I just wanted to remind everyone that all the stuff that we've shared, the papers and the parables, all that is on our. It's been copied to our Facebook page. So if you want to find the 101 Facebook page, you can access all the media there.
And if you don't have a Facebook account, usually in a few days, the video that we're taking here is actually uploaded to the Buddhist Temple, San Antonio Buddhist Temple YouTube channel.
Right. The videos will go to the YouTube
watch
channel,
on the
so
YouTube
you can
channel.
see them there as well.
Mm-hmm. Or if you know someone in your life who really would benefit from hearing about suffering in this way, share that link. So this is a great way to sort of have those insights grow, not just in yourself, but in others as well. Good. Finally, because this temple, does require help and money to continue, I asked you to find if you have it in your heart, and if you have the capacity to make a financial donation, you can always make donations at the donation boxes. If you have other priorities for your money, then I ask consider donating some of your time or talent. There's always a need to help watering or care for the temple in some way. So if you want to do some sweeping meditation, you can come here and help us out with that. Or if you have other priorities for your money, time, and talent, then I ask that you please find some place to give, to be generous. The act of generosity is counter to the act of mental illness. Very often when we are depressed or anxious or stressed out, we become too self-focused. And so the act of generosity helps to balance that by continuing to focus on yourself, but also focus on others and find that balance. If you are a caregiver, a counselor, a doctor, a nurse, or whatever, I ask of you the opposite. You already give enough. You give a lot to others. So please take time for yourself. Too many of the caregivers in our nation do not do enough self-care. So we don't want your money. We don't want your time or talent. We want you to take care of yourself. Okay? Great. Let's share the merit. May any merit we may have accrued by sharing the Dharma here today bring us and others joy, safety, peace, and hope. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You guys made my day, made my week. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. I know, us young guys are having a tough